Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today's episode is all about transforming how we lead in today's complex and fast-changing world. My guests are Laura and Dominic Ashley-Timms, co-authors of the award-winning book, The Answer is a Question. With decades of global experience, they've cracked the code on what makes managers truly effective. In this conversation, we dive into the crisis of disengagement, the rise of Gen Z, the burnout epidemic, and why simply having all the answers is no longer the mark of a great leader. You'll learn the most important leadership move you can make is to ask better questions, and how doing so can help you reclaim a full day in your schedule each week. Now, if you've ever felt overwhelmed as a manager, or if you've wanted to build a team that's truly engaged, empowered, and ready to lead, this is your episode. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Laura and Dominic Ashley-Timms. Laura learned about the power of coaching from her early career in international table tennis and from coaching others at Oxford University, where she was one of the first women to enter Oriel College. She is now recognized as a global leader in coaching. Dominic studied for a degree in ergonomics and later earned his EMBA from IMD in Lausanne as part of his management consulting career. He has built an expertise and passion for the human side of change. Laura and Dominic recently co-authored the best-selling management book, The Answer is a Question, the Missing Superpower that changes everything and will transform your impact as a manager and leader, which won Distinguished Favorite at the New York City Big Book Awards in 2023. The last 2 decades, they've been the visionaries behind Notion, a performance improvement consultancy, and a new approach to management called operational coaching. I'm excited to have them both on the show to talk about how to have a greater impact as a leader. So Laura and Dominic, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. I'm honored to have you on the show. Let's talk a little bit about this book. This book is called The Answer is a Question. I love the idea for that title, but what compelled you to write this specific book at this time?
Well, interesting. We've been actually toying with the idea for about 5 years before we finally wrote it. And the impetus eventually came from the UK government, actually. We've been involved in a major global study for them. And at the end of it, they sort of said to us, well, it's great you've done this and you've got this amazing result, but what are you doing to make this accessible to a wider audience? And I think that was a push we finally needed to put all of these years of work in an accessible way that we could share it. And really, that study was an incredible turning point for us, because having had these great results for years with all of our clients, we'd never really been involved in a major academic study. And we partnered with the London School of Economics, who were the evaluation partner. So to have a third party evaluate the work you're doing and sort of say, yeah, this actually is scientifically proven to work, was kind of one of those turning points in our careers, and also possibly one of the stupidest things we'd ever done in our life, because about halfway through this study I actually was sitting in a board meeting with the government and the evaluation kind of process, and it was kind of a published or be damned moment, and it never occurred to us that actually it might not have been successful. And if it hadn't have been successful, they'd have still published the results, and yeah, we'd have lost our business. So there you go. Yeah, risk management is something you can take away from this. Always do your risk management. But it was really, really exciting, actually. And at the end of it, we were actually delighted to have the push and very, very humbled by the impact the book's having.
That's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the title. The Answer is a Question. So why is the title that? Because I think that would be interesting to our listeners.
Well, it's based on the strength of our work. We've been working with groups of managers and leaders for the last 20 years all around the world, and doing quite a lot of behavioral work to really understand what makes the distinct difference between those managers who are really able to engage their teams and those who tend to be more transactional in the way that they manage. And what we found was that there are a group of behaviors based around how we might all use purposeful inquiry. And as a method for engaging the skills and talents of people, our work, and now this evidence-backed study by the London School of Economics has proved that as a way of pulling people towards you, the use of inquiry is much more powerful than directing or telling in any given moment. So that's really the premise for the title of the book. The answer is a question. Yeah, that's it. That's it, really.
I love that. You know, I tell folks, and my listeners know this, I was 32 years old when I got my first manufacturing, the first head of manufacturing, so my first factory. And I remember being young and not knowing a lot about manufacturing. And I had an experienced workforce that had been there, you know, longer than I've been with the company. But I remember that I thought I had to know everything to be the manager. And what I learned through that first factory manager job is that that I needed to have, probably more important to having all the answers, was having the right questions and being willing to shut up and listen to the experts that were around me. And I think I discovered that in my first senior role that I had, was that questions are very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah. All right. So why now? Why for this book at this time? So is it aimed at what's happening at work? Are we capitalizing on recent trends? I know there's this thing called the Great Detachment related to the Gen Zs. Why now for this book?
Well, as Laura mentioned, I think we've been planning to write the book for a number of years, but the tipping point for finally writing it was the astonishing results from the research. And you know, we being invited to think about how to make our work more accessible really then brought the book to the fore, and we wanted to publish that. But then at the same time, so much has happened in the last 5 years in particular, the radical changes to our workplaces, the expectations that people have and how they've changed since COVID. People want more from their work. They want to be more acknowledged. They want to be able to contribute. If they're in a workplace where they're not feeling valued, they're more likely and able to leave, and they're more willing to do that than ever before. And at the same time, we've got a new generation entering the workforce, who come in with very, very different expectations about what they want from work. And one thing that they really don't want, this Gen Z, as they're called, coming into the workplace, they don't want to be directed. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be nurtured. They want to work with a manager who's going to cultivate them and recognize the skills they have to offer and know how to be able to pull that from them. So you've got these dynamics, a shift in the workplace, a new generation entering the workplace, but also at the same time, the American Psychological Association in particular is reporting that over 50% of managers say that they're burnt out. So there's a lot going on about the pressures we're all facing, the speed of change. Organizations who want to keep up are just piling more and more onto their managers, who now have to be well-being coaches, career coaches, and still keep all the lights on and firefight through every single day. So it's no surprise, and you'll know this running your own business, that those pressures can mount up, and we've got rises in sickness and absence. So there's a lot of things happening. So as we're writing this book, why it's captured the imagination is it offers a way forward that's quite different to what has come before. And the book's been selling well, both in the UK and across Europe, but also in North America as well, which we're really pleased to see, because I think it's for the first time that anyone's just taken a big step back and said, what's really going on here?
That's fantastic. So what is the way forward? I mean, so what would, you've done this research, you learned some things through this, extensive research that you did. What did you discover, and what's the goal of this book that you hope to get leaders to be able to understand through the research you did?
Well, I guess our main goal as a company is actually to unleash the potential of everyone. And what we mean by that is really looking at how we can end the line manager lottery. And you must know this, John, you know, that lottery when one time you have a manager that inspires you and then you get promoted or you change job or your manager leaves for some reason, and then you get your next manager and he's so bad or she's so bad that you leave the company. I mean, half of us leave a company to get away from a poor relationship with a line manager is like frightening. And that's just, you know, that's not a way to live your life. It's, you know, who's going to manage you next week. So we really wanted to create a really easy and accessible way for all managers and leaders to become better people, and in a way that's fun and enjoyable and not stressful. Like Dominic said, we're under so much pressure as leaders and managers right now, and we often don't enjoy that part of our job, partly because we're often accidental managers. We kind of were good at something and got promoted, and then we kind of have this people line management responsibility thrust upon us. So we wanted to really share the tools that we know have worked in over 40 countries for managers that have been through our programs. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is create epic workplace cultures, and that stands for engaging, productive, inclusive, and collaborative. So these amazing places you go to work, that if we could inspire 1 million star managers to start changing the way they enjoy their role as a manager and leader, and we all worked in these epic workplace cultures, how much fun would it be to go to work? And that's the aim of this book.
Well, it sounds like we have a common goal. Like the purpose of this podcast is to build a world with better bosses. That's what we created.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of like, I want to go to a place where I enjoy going to work every day. And I've created that in my company. And it's one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur 9 years ago. I got tired of corporate culture. I just said, you know, I've been doing it for 22 years at 3 global companies. And I said, I can't do it anymore. I can't sell my soul right to the corporate bosses and to do everything in a very very inhuman approach to leading people. And I said, I can't do it anymore. I need to do this on my own. And ever since that, I've enjoyed my work, and I've enjoyed, and the people I work with, they enjoy coming to work. We laugh, we have a good time. We work hard, but we're doing something towards a goal that we all believe in. And so we've created a culture that's great to be at. And I wish we could do more of that inside larger companies. And I know some companies can do it, but still some are so stuck in their ways that they can't get out of that corporate, inhuman approach to leadership.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So, I mean, you talked about the challenges, right? So we've got a workforce now that wants to be nurtured, cultivated. We got burnout. Burnout is a big issue with managers. It seems like everything is falling on their shoulders. Why is management and leadership such an important topic right now with this shift that's happening in the workplace?
But I think it comes down to these really poor engagement levels we've got everywhere. And actually, if we hit a crisis point, we've got to do something. It's not actually ever going to change if we sit here with 82% of our managers at work being accidental managers and people that aren't going to lean into the people side of the role. We think there's something like 14 million accidental managers in the USA alone. Just think about the number of interactions those individuals are having every day and how many colleagues they are impacting and creating these miserable work experiences for. And we know that having accidental managers causes something like a 16% drop in productivity, significant staff retention issues. And actually, there's now evidence that accidental managers cause health conditions like heart attacks and strokes. I mean, really, really serious. So we kind of hit this crisis point that we actually have to now lean into this. And you talked about big corporates. In smaller businesses, we can be more agile. It's more about maybe the personality of the leader. But in larger organizations, you can't hide from this anymore. I think we've got our head in the sand, and it's really time to get it out. You know, we all come to work to want to do our absolute best. And we have a concept in the book called Frankenstein managers. We're all Frankenstein managers, in that we've all gone through life learning something from one boss that did something well, so we do more of that, or we do a little bit less of, or walk away from that environment you didn't like. You talked yourself, John, just then about you didn't like the faceless feeling in big corporates, so you try and create a better culture where you are. So we're just plugging everything on and becoming these Frankensteins of all the good and bad, the books we've read, the podcasts we've listened to, and the experiences we've had. But actually, how do you go from that to having a more professional approach to what good management looks like? So I think that's why it's really, really important now. And Dominic, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that. And you know yourself, John, you just said you came out of the corporate world and you wanted to create an environment where it feels very different. And you know how that feels different. And you know the effort that you put into being a more effective engager of the people in your workforce. And I think that partly that comes from confidence, and knowing how to do that. And with so many of these accidental managers, it's so frightening how few managers, once they're appointed to their line management role, get any training whatsoever. So what happens is they go into their new role as a manager, but no one's ever really sat them down and said, now you're a manager, here's how you might want to adapt your communication skills and in a way that's going to be able to get the best from people. So what tends to happen is you become a super worker. You just work harder and you take on all the problems of the team, and you take on all that yourself, probably while still doing aspects of your previous job, which you don't quite know how to let go of yet. But actually, when we become a line manager, something has to change. We need to change our mental model about what we're there to do. And Gallup's done a huge amount of research around this and the impact on employee engagement. And they've calculated that the impact of low employee engagement around the world, you ready for this, is worth $8.9 trillion to global GDP.
Wow.
And they are saying in their annual report, which is the study of the global workforce they do every year, they're saying the impact is now so bad that it's actually having an impact on the life chances of people around the world, the way that they're engaged in the workplace. And managers are responsible for about 70% of the variance in that employee engagement. And just of note, employee engagement in the US has gone down now for two years in a row, and it's at its lowest point since 2014. And a lot of that is being driven by Gen Z, who are entering the workforce and finding it's not the environments that they really want to thrive in. They're not finding the manager that can cultivate them. They're not finding the people that will develop them. And the truth is that our current line managers literally do not know how to engage this new generation. We just don't know how to manage and engage and draw the best from them. So we're beyond urgent now. We're actually desperate. We should have been fixing this yesterday. And if we don't do something now, I don't know what's going to happen to our workplaces. I really don't. I think it's very, very challenging right now. Something new is needed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just, one of the reasons we started this podcast, one of the reasons I wrote the books that I wrote, because I just feel like this problem has been, it seems like it's getting worse and not better. And like you mentioned, the Gallup survey is actually what got me going into leadership. Is like, why is it so bad? Why? Because to me, it seems like common sense. I often say that leadership is a people business. It's about people. And it seems like we don't understand those basic facts. As you say, I love the term accidental managers, but I think it's this idea that a lot of people get promoted based on their individual contributions and not based on their leadership skills and or talents. And so they're put in positions where they have to figure leadership out without much training or development or even any demonstrated leadership skills. And so I think that's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, that's the problem though, isn't it? Because all the markers up until now is you get promoted on the strength of your ability to solve bigger problems. And so they'll put you into a role where you have bigger problems to solve. But the risk of that is you're just taking more and more of the work on yourself, and you're not actually focusing on the biggest thing that's going to have the biggest impact, which is enabling your team to be able to do that stuff. And so we do actually have to mentally shift our roles to become a line manager, and we need to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. It's definitely something that's a passion of mine as well. So I'm glad to hear you recognize that and also trying to address it as well. Let's switch gears a little bit. You have a method called operational coaching. So what's distinctive about this approach, compared to other approaches in terms of coaching?
Would you want to take that one?
Well, I think operational coaching is more the mindset of management. So instead of looking for what needs to be fixed, as Dominic said, and stepping into firefight and taking on everyone else's issues, it's really about learning how to change your role as a line manager to enable others by asking questions. So when people come to you with a problem, our gut is to go and help them. So how do we break that habit of wanting to help them? Because when we do that, we just do more of the doing. So operational coaching is really leaning into an inquiry-led approach where instead of doing the doing, you're crafting really powerful questions that not to data collect as a manager, not to help you solve the problem, but to help the other person have an amazing insight and come up with their own solution, which they can then take on. So it's about how you bring coaching behaviors into the flow of work, into your everyday conversations, on the phone, in a Zoom call, walking down a corridor, in a meeting with colleagues, managing up even, and even something you might use at home with your family and teenage children. It's a way of being. It's a way of style of management that you are using the power of questions to really enable others' potential.
Yeah, I'd add to that as well, because there's strong research that shows that if somebody comes to you with a problem and you solve that problem for them rather, you feel good that you've solved the problem. You've done your job as a manager. You felt obligated to help, and you did help. But actually, if we pick away at that, what we find is we've potentially actually diminished the other person or marginalized them, because they haven't now had the opportunity to show the thinking that they could have done if we'd consulted them. And so you send them away with a flea in their ear and they carry out your instruction. But we have now there's no opportunity for me to give them any appreciative feedback. Whereas if I can engage them in that moment, if I just stop long enough to think about, is this a coachable moment? And I ask them a question and that engages them. And then as a result of that conversation, they identify an action that we can take, or they can take. Then I've got that opportunity to follow up with some appreciative feedback. So we've got more of this benevolent cycle. I'm just minded of a story, actually. I was actually involved. We when we run our programs, we run small group sessions afterwards, and it's an opportunity for the people going through our program to share some of their successes. And I remember this particular quite senior manager sharing a story with us, because he wanted to explain that this young lady that worked for him had come to him with an idea, and he was really proud of himself because he hadn't told her why the idea wouldn't work, as he typically would do, because he's seen it all, done it all. But instead, he engaged a conversation with her, and as a result of the conversation, between them, they identified 3 options and agreed that she would go away and work those options up for him. And he was very pleased, and he wanted to share that he'd done all these right things. He consulted, engaged, and asked questions. He was shocked when she came back just 4 days later, not just with a bit more work on each of the options, but 3 fully worked up business cases. She had actually rung people across the organization, consulted, put costings against it, and had really fleshed these out. And he said, it's fantastic. And again, he engaged with the conversation, very proud of himself, didn't diminish anything she was doing, helped her really get to a point where they identified one that she would then take forward. And he said, I was so proud of myself because I went through that process and I really applied everything I'd learned. I really thought about questions I could ask to stimulate her thinking. This wasn't about me.
Yeah.
He said, but that pride lasted for about 6 seconds, because suddenly I was consumed by the greatest guilt I think I've ever felt in my career, because I recognized that that young lady's been working for me for 3 years, and it's my ego which has been squandering her natural talent.
Yes.
And I think that is the story that brings everything together for me, because he then said, I'm 62 years old. I've got a few years left of my career, and I now know absolutely what my purpose is. It is to bring on the next generation of leaders that are going to take this organization forward. I have nothing more to prove. I've arrived. It's not about me. And that's what we should all be thinking about line managers. I'm the manager. My only role and purpose is to help my team to advance. And if I do that well, someone should be pushing me forward to my next role.
I love that. I love that story. I love what you're talking about, because I'm 58 years old. I've been running manufacturing businesses for 30 years. This is my 9th manufacturing plant. I've seen just about everything that can happen, and I know the answers to most problems. But I find myself purposely not coming up with a solution, because I want my team to get the chance to solve problems, to learn, to make mistakes, to do some of the things that I had to do throughout my career. So I find it's my role as sort of an older, more experienced manager to let my younger ones take ownership, take the reins, see what the challenges are of implementing their idea in what works and what doesn't work. Otherwise, again, like you said, we're solving the problems for them. and they never get a chance to be challenged. They never get a chance to learn. They never get a chance to fail in some cases and learn
100%.
through that failure. So it's such an
more
important part. Yeah.
More than that, you're recycling your previous knowledge. You know,
Yes.
you're not entertaining the idea that they might come up with an entirely new insight, which
Yeah.
you wouldn't have previously considered. So I think it's more important than ever. And especially, I'm so excited about this new generation entering the workforce. Gen Z think differently, they act differently, they have a different perspective on everything. We need to learn how to tap into that.
Yeah, I love what you say that. I was just like last night we had three of my 20-year-olds in my marketing department. We're taking a new approach to the business, and I just love the energy that they have, the ideas they have. I literally let them run with it because I feel like they're the ones that they're gonna steer the ship correctly with respect to how we're going to market the company going forward versus my old ideas, you know. And so I love seeing that excitement, that energy, the ideas again. The better ideas than I would come up with. So I think that as leaders, we have to be a little bit humble, and we have to really let our young people shine, you know. And I think that's good to hear that you're focused in on that. And I love the idea that it's every day that, you know, Laura, you mentioned it's everything that you're doing as you walk through the day. It's how you approach this, because I think as leaders, we're on stage, right? 24/7, everyone's watching us. And so we can't just be, you know, doing the right thing in our one-on-one meetings. It's every day in every meeting as we walk on the shop floor, as we see people in the hallway. It's every day. It's a part of that. So I love to hear that approach.
I think that's really, really important, because so much when we're taught about coaching historically, it's been these episodic conversations. You're going to have a right good talking to. We're going to sit down and have a coaching conversation. And almost all training around coaching has been around that. You know, the reason we developed the model, you know, the STAR model originally, was off the back of that feedback. We'd be pulled into organizations and they put 2,000, sometimes 4,000 people through a manager as coach program. And they were like, but, you know, there's been no change in their behavior. Nothing's different. They all said the program was amazing. You know, we got amazing feedback. Look at these happy sheets. Everyone scored it 5 out of 5, but nothing's changed. And that was really the catalyst, is when we actually broke down what they were learning in those workshops. It was brilliantly taught, nice materials, and they did have a great time. But were they being taught the right stuff? They were being taught how to be a coach, and they were being taught executive coaching skills. But when you're a manager, you're under pressure, you're busy, you're dealing with stuff every day, you're firefighting. You're not, your work isn't made up of these like lovely, relaxed situations where you sit down and have an hour's chat with someone all about them. So it just, you know, the whole concept really of operational coaching and the model we then designed around that style was exactly what you just said. It's about how do you give the skills in a way that's accessible for managers, to support managers, to help them change, as opposed to always being about the other person.
I think that's fantastic. So you mentioned the STAR model. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that approach is?
Yeah, so when we kind of were doing all this research with the organizations, and we started interviewing all of these managers that have been through these programs that weren't having any impact, we always came back and says, you know, why aren't you using it? I thought it was great. I'll use it in the one-to-one. I'll use it, you know, that one time a year, or that once a month, or once a quarter. But the reality is I haven't got time to do this. I'm busy, right? I've got to get the mail out. I've got to you know, run the factory. I've got to run the business. You know, whatever the role was, there was always a reason. And the reason was always, I haven't got time for this. So we kind of sat down and had a really hard look at what would need to be different. Like, I had to ask ourselves better questions, you know, about, okay, so what would need to be different to help managers bring coaching into the flow of work? And that's really how STAR evolved. And STAR is a simple 4-step model, and it's a behavioral change model, because obviously what we need to do is change our behavior as leaders and managers to stop running in to solve problems and telling people what to do, and learn instead to ask better and more powerful questions. So the first half of the model is S for stop, and T is for think, and that's all about behavioral change. So stop is kind of to step back in the moment as someone runs to you with a problem. Stop and just check for a second, you know, don't run in and bite your tongue, don't run in and tell someone what to do, and change your state to be receptive, to think. T is for think, is this a coachable moment? can I ask a question here instead of telling someone what to do? And there will be situations when you might have to, if you work in hospitals or you work in emergency services or in the police force, there are some times when you do have to still tell in and solve a problem. But even in that situation, if not now, then when? If I have to tell now, can I retrospectively go back and do a debrief and have a redo almost the conversation afterwards? So can't do it now, but I could still do it later. So that's S&T. And once you've embedded that habitual change, that happens in a flick of a finger. You know, you learn to do that instinctively. The second half of the model is A is for ask and actively listening, and R is for result. So stop, think, ask, result. So A is now really more about learning those coaching skills, but learning how to really craft questions for the benefit of others. So we're not data finding, we're not asking so that we can learn more. We're only asking to create a light bulb moment in the other person. So it's learning quite deep skills actually, and how to craft questions slightly differently to bring really great insights to the other person. And then you're still a line manager. So this is still about you as a manager. It's not all about the other person. So R is for result. There has to be an outcome from that conversation. This might be a two sentences walking down a corridor, right? This isn't a big long conversation. It could happen in a couple of minutes. It could be a few questions. It could be, like I say, on a phone call or anything. It's in the flow of work, but you still need to have an outcome. Otherwise it's just a chat, right? So you've got to have an outcome. So R is to get a commitment. So what one thing are they going to do next, however small that step is, and how are you going to follow up as a line manager to see how it went? And that can be really informal. Like John, you just had a great couple of ideas there. Which one of those are you going to do? So great. When can you fit that in? Tomorrow. Super. So should we pick up on Thursday then and see how you got on? So there's always that kind of commitment to action embedded into it. And that's the STAR model.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's it's simple enough that you can be applied, like you said, in an operational way where it's every day, it's every interaction that you have with employees. One of the things you talked about was asking questions and having the ability to actively listen. And so I would imagine those questions are important. Can you give us some examples of the type of questions that we should be asking as leaders when we have these STAR interactions?
Yeah, it's fascinating. When we were developing this approach in the work we were doing, I mean, you'll be amazed. There's very little scientific research around the power of questions to stimulate different aspects of people's thinking. I think the only research we found was around survey design, which is a use of emotionally charged words and how they might influence thinking. So actually, we've pushed the boundaries on this. How can we? Laura mentioned, designing questions. How can we as managers learn to use questions in a way that stimulates people's thinking in the way that's most helpful to them from where they're at right now? And that's so different from what we normally use, which is, as Laura said, we use these questions to gather information. We use diagnostic questioning because we see ourselves as the problem solver. We've got to get away from that. Can you imagine stop asking questions to gather information for us and start asking questions solely for the benefit of the other person is a radical shift in behavior. So, a couple of ideas here. We talk about questions. There's three different types of questions early on we talk about. One is shifting perspective, and you'll be familiar with what that is. And so a great question there might be, well, what advice would you give to a colleague in your situation?
Yeah, I love
so
that.
This is forcing their thinking from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And what that does, it shakes loose new insights. It puts them in a different perspective to think now about how would that person be regarding the situation and what would occur to them from having thought that through, and does that give them new insight which they can act upon? So I think it's really, really helpful when somebody seems to be a bit stuck with where they're thinking. What would your boss say if he was going to be making that decision? What would he be thinking? And another one is challenging barriers. And I really like this because we're all bounded by the barriers that we build for ourselves. A question like, well, what makes you think you can't pick up the phone and speak to that person directly? it's something that would never occur to them. Just naturally, they've put this barrier in place. It would never have occurred to them to pick up the phone and speak to that person. So by just asking these questions, they go, well, there's absolutely nothing to stop me picking up the phone. Well, that's fantastic. When can you speak to them? So challenging their own barriers really helps then expand people's sphere of influence. It really helps them see that they do have agency and they can take action. And then a third type of question I really like, which is what we call changing context. So this is taking a situation, but then recasting it back in a way that's different, again, just to force out different thinking. So a good question, let's say that somebody's struggling with a situation, you say, well, imagine that you'd already achieved the result and it's all going swimmingly well. Looking back, what was it that would have had to have changed? And so you're taking someone to a future state where they're now seeing it operating the way it should be operating. Now they're looking back, and it's just it's almost a change context, but looking from that perspective of a different future. And so just thinking about how we shake up the situations, again, as a technique for shaking out new insight and helping stimulate thinking in a different way, allows us to sort of put more stuff on the table for them to pick through to help them determine an action they can take going forward. And this need not be complicated. The approach we've developed really helps managers get this sensitivity around what's the most powerful type of question I could ask this individual right now that's going to help stimulate their thinking. So there's just some ideas there, but this is what it's about. It's about having that, Laura talked about that behavioral shift, learning to stop and to think, what does this person really need from me right now? And how can I ask them a question that's most helpful to them to stimulate their thinking? And that's really the approach.
When I listen to you talk about these powerful questions, all I can think of is if we want to have an engaged workforce, we have to engage our workforce. We have to get them to be thinking, and we have to get them asking questions that'll help them, think and work through some problems. Because again, if we can bring a team of people together to solve our problems, we're going to be much more successful than if we try to solve them ourselves. Even if we're an experienced manager, getting the wisdom from a team will ultimately be more successful. And it's what we need in a fast-moving workplace as well, as we need the ideas from everyone if we're going to want to be successful. So if we want an engaged workforce, we have to be an engaging manager, it sounds like.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I think engagement isn't complicated. If we want to increase employee engagement levels, we have to engage. You said it, absolutely. And engage not just by directing and telling, but truly engage the skills and the talents that they have to offer. If we just could tap into that, and we do that using this very invitational form of management where we're using what we call purposeful inquiry to tap into what people have to offer. And it's incredibly powerful. I mean, when we work with organizations, we see shifts in team dynamics in as little as 2 weeks. I mean, it is truly remarkable. And the results of the research showed that managers who learn to adopt this operational coaching style spend 70% more time coaching their team members in the flow of work than they were before, which is just profound.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love hearing that what I would say is sort of a common sense approach to it. I love seeing it backed up by the research and backed up by success in terms of the people that have employed these techniques and they find success with it. I love hearing those stories, and it makes me feel great that you guys have created this in a simple way to help people understand how they can make a greater impact as leaders. So my hat's off to you for the work that you're doing. I think it's fantastic. Just as we wrap up, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners today?
Well, I think that one of the most powerful things that we all need to think about and is likely to have the greatest impact on our own careers is the extent to which we're going to develop our communication and engagement skills. The better we are at communicating and engaging with people, it's likely to influence the rate at which we get promoted ourselves. And we should be promoted for that, by the way. It's not about I've solved another great problem and I get promoted and I've left my team in my wake. This is about how am I being propelled forward by a team that's enabled. And so I'm being recognized for my skill in working with the next team and taking them to a new place. I think that's a much more powerful way of getting ourselves promoted. It also happens that purposeful inquiry are exactly the skills we need to take advantage of all these new AI tools that are coming out. We need to know how to ask more powerful questions, and then AI would work for us even harder. We're just not, none of us are trained to use inquiry in this way. We are stuck in the world of using diagnostic questioning. We gather information. So I think it's the message is these skills are likely to help you in all regards, and especially if you're an accidental manager, then investing just an hour a week in developing this operational coaching style could really transform your career. And we're very, very lucky that our learners share with us when they get promoted on the back of this, and they share with us the success stories they've had with using this style of engagement. Laura, I don't know if we want to add anything to that.
I just think, I'm sure a lot of the people listening are probably quite stressed and busy in their day-to-day lives. And I suppose one of the biggest things we hear about all the time is when you make these changes, you win a day a week back. And I think just think about for a minute how stressed you might be listening to this and what you could do with a day a week as you stop doing all the doing and taking on all the extra work and instead start spending that 70% time coaching that Dominic mentioned, that 70% more time. You win a day a week back to that higher value work you really want to do. When you get to the end of the week and you look at your to-do list and you realize you've done everyone else's work and you've crossed off nothing from your to-do list, how if that was different in a few months' time? And I think that's the other thing. It's not just this great manager you're being for everyone else, but it's how much better you feel, how much better your life is. And I think I mentioned right at the beginning, it's the life skill. It's not just about work. I mean, work is really important to a lot of us, but we do have a life outside of work. The number of people that write to us have better relationships with their teenage sons, better relationships with their partners, how they've used it outside of work with their friendships is really, really just phenomenal, actually, and just wonderful. So this is a skill that is just kind of a life skill as well as something that you'll really, really enjoy as a manager at work.
Well, fantastic. And again, I can see where this would really work. It's just a simple way that people can understand how to take this approach that can really help them, again, take that little bit of stress off your own self and then also engage your team. And so they create an environment where people are excited to come to work every day because they're being challenged and they're getting a chance to make a difference in their companies. Instead of just doing grunt work, they're actually making a difference. And so I think that's what people want, especially younger generations. They want to make a difference. So we got to give them that chance. And so, and stop trying to solve all the problems yourself, right? Yeah, you have a team for a reason.
100%.
So I love
100%.
that. I love that. So, well, this has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about you guys, the work you do, and this new book?
Well, we are fairly unique with our surname. So if you go onto LinkedIn and look for Laura Ashley-Timms or Dominic Ashley-Timms, you should get straight to us. And the company on LinkedIn is Notion-Star. So do engage with us on LinkedIn. We put lots of information up there. We have a website dedicated to this particular part of our business called starmanager.global. And of course, I would really encourage all your listeners to read the book, which you can find on Amazon. So the answer is a question. And you can also get it from Barnes & Noble and other good bookstores, but Amazon obviously is probably the easiest.
Fantastic. And we're going to put links in the show notes for all those resources. And again, if something really stood out to you in this conversation, I highly recommend you reach out to Laura and Dominic. They're the experts. They're going to steer you in the right direction. So that's why we put the links in the show notes. So if you're in your car right now, you're in the gym, and suddenly you're like, oh, I really need to talk to these two. They've got a solution for my pain points that I'm having as a leader. That's why the links in the show notes. Go reach out to them, ask them a question, reach out to them on LinkedIn, follow their website, and you'll reach a place where you can contact them, and then get the book. The book is called The Answer is a Question. Very powerful. Get this book. The link is there in the show notes as well. I highly encourage you to pick that up and become a better leader today. Laura, Dominic, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with our listeners today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, John.
Thank you. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.